Welcome everybody. This is the first class of voice change. In competitive field, you will get voice change mainly in mains part. In preliminary section, there is less use of voice change, but in mains part it have a huge part like SSC CGL and WCS. In SSC CGL it's come up to number 20 to 25. So take a look for the voice change. What is voice? Voice in grammar, form of verb indicating the relation between the participants in a narrated event and the event itself. That means in a sentence there is a participants and the event, and the voice is making a relation or indicating a relation between them. That means the participant is the subject and the event is the object. So it makes a relationship between the subject and the object. The voice of the verb describes the relationship between the action that the verb expresses and the participants identified by its argument. So the thing is that the participant and the action, the relationship between the action and the participant. Generally we use the passive when the focus is on the action, not on who or what is performing the action. When we use active voice, we mainly focus on the subject. That means who is making the action or who is responsible for the action. But in the passive voice, we are focusing on the action, not the subject. Like Rabindranath Tagore wrote Gitanjali. Here the subject of the verb is doing the action. That means Rabindranath Tagore is doing the work of writing Gitanjali. The next sentence, the same sentence is converted into the passive, that is the Gitanjali was written by Rabindranath Tagore. Here the object of the first sentence was Gitanjali, and this is the subject in this sentence. Gitanjali was written by Rabindranath Tagore. Here the motive of the speaker is on the Gitanjali. So he used the passive voice. Okay, so when we are focusing on the subject, we use the active voice, and when the focus should be on the object or on the action, we use the passive voice. Then type of voice. Mainly there are two types of voice, that is the active voice and the other is the passive voice. What is the active voice? Where the subject doing the action. Like Rabindranath Tagore wrote Gitanjali. Here subject Rabindranath Tagore is in action. And the passive voice where the subject of the verb is being acted upon. Like subject of the verb is being acted upon means the writing of the Gitanjali was acted upon Rabindranath Tagore. So it is clear that when the subject is doing the action, that is the active voice, and where the subject of the verb is being acted upon, or when we focus on the action, then that is the passive voice. we have some rules. We have to follow some rules for voice change in the tenses. According to the tense, there are several sentence structure for each tense. So the sentence structure of the passive voice respecting to the tense is changed. So we have to go through all the rules for the respecting tenses. First of all, we comes to for the present tense, and we all know that there are four types of present tense. First, simple present tense. Active voice. The structure of the active voice is subject plus verb plus object, and structure for the passive voice object plus verb plus verb third form plus by plus subject. Example, we use mobile phone very much in the present days. It is the simple present tense. The passive voice should be mobile phone is used very much by us in present days. Here the mobile phone, what is the object, is comes to the first, then be verb, as the mobile phone is the third person and singular number because it is indicating to the total mobile phone, so it carry the singular form. Then verb third form used is the third form of verb use, then the object, then by, then the subject or the agent, and the last part or the rest part. So the passive voice is mobile phone is used very much by us in present days. Then rules for present continuous tense. Active voice, subject auxiliary verb main verb with ing plus object, and passive voice object plus auxiliary verb plus being plus verb third form by subject. Example, the government is trying to cope up with the pandemic situation. The passive voice should be the pandemic situation is comes to the first, then auxiliary verb, then being, and the third form of main verb tried to cope up by the government. So that is the pandemic situation is being tried to cope up by the government. In present continuous tense, we have to mind the use of being. Let's come to next part, voice change of present perfect tense. The active voice rules subject plus has, then verb third form and object, and passive voice rules object plus has have respecting according to the objects we use has or have, then been plus verb third form plus by plus subject. Example, I have written the notification. Passive voice, the notification has been, according to notification here we use has, then been, then verb third form written by subject. We then go for present perfect continuous tense. The rules for active voice is subject plus has or have plus been plus verb ing, then for or from or since, then time. Passive voice will be subject means the object. This means the object then has or have, then been, then the being plus third form, then object or the subject, then time. I have been teaching competitive exam for 5 years. The passive voice, it will be a competitive exam has been being taught by me for 5 years. Here's rectify the spelling by. Then the competitive exam has been being taught by me for 5 years. You have to careful the use of been and being simultaneously in this section. But practically we cannot use passive voice for the perfect continuous tense, and we should avoid in the writing section. Then go to past tense. Then the rule for simple past. The active voice rule is subject plus verb, past tense plus object. Passive voice rules is object plus be verb plus verb third form, then by and the subject. Rabindranath Tagore wrote Gitanjali. It will be Gitanjali was written by Rabindranath Tagore. And we use the be verb according to the subject of the passive voice. The object of the active voice will be the subject of the passive voice. Rules for past continuous. Subject plus be verb plus verb with ing, then object. Passive voice rules will be object plus be verb plus being plus third form plus by plus subject. We are trying our best to give relief to the victims. Then passive voice will be the best efforts was being tried by us to give relief to the victims. The best efforts in the active voice, it was the best, but that stands for the best efforts. So in converting it in the passive voice, we write that the best efforts, and the best efforts is the singular form and it carried the verb watch. Then the sentence is the best efforts was being tried by us to give relief to the victims. So keep in mind that when continuous tense is used in the passive voice, the being should be used for the ing part, and the verb will be in the third form in every passive voice. Rules for past perfect tense. Active voice, subject plus had plus verb third form plus object, and passive voice, object plus had plus been plus verb third form plus object. Example, they had completed all projects before I went to office. Passive voice, all projects had been completed by them before I went to office. So in the last part, the active voice, that is before I went to office, will be the same, and the main part of where we use the past perfect tense, they had completed all the projects, will be converted in the passive voice, and it will be noticed by you that where in the active voice there is has or have, and in passive voice it should be converted with used with been, this B-E-E-N. So when we convert the continuous tense in passive, there will be the use of being, that is the B-E-I-N-G. For the verb plus ing, we used being in passive voice, and in the where there is the has or have in active voice, that is means the in perfect tense or perfect continuous tense, for has or have, it should we used has or have been or had been, BEEN, for the has or have. Then we come to the next part, that is the rules for past perfect continuous tense. The active voice rules is subject plus had plus been plus verb with ing plus object plus for or from time. The passive voice is object plus had or have, object plus had been, then being, then verb third form plus by plus subject plus for or from time. They had been providing relief to the victims for 1 week. The passive voice is the relief had been being provided by them for 1 week. Here in the active voice there is used of had and there is use of verb with ing. So in the passive voice there will be had been and being. But we should avoid the passive voice of perfect continuous tense, past or continuous in writing. It is so clumsy and generally it's not used in writing. Passive voice rules for future tense. For the simple future, active voice rules is subject plus auxiliary verb plus main verb plus object. And the passive voice is object plus auxiliary verb plus be plus main verb third form plus by plus subject. Here the use of be because of the auxiliary verb is in the active voice. That's why we use the be. Okay, we go to the present past tense and then we go to the future tense. The example is we shall overcome the situation. The passive voice will be like that. The situation will be overcome by us. As there is a shall in the present active voice, the passive voice is the situation will be overcome by us. Then future tense, future continuous tense, active voice is like subject plus will or shall, then be then verb with ing, then object. Passive voice is object plus shall or will, then be, then being, then verb third form, then by plus subject. Like we shall be doing our duty even at the worst situation. Passive voice, our duty will be being done by us even at the worst situation. So here we used being because in active voice there is verb with ing. Note, we should avoid using this passive voice as it seems very clumsy. After that be, the passive form is already used in the active voice. Look at the simple future. Be is used in the passive voice, but in the future continuous tense we used be at the active voice, but which should be used in the passive voice. But the sentence construction is like that, so passive voice will be more clumsy, and we are advised not to use in writing section. Then future perfect tense. Active voice rule is subject plus will have, then main verb third form, then object. And the passive voice will be object plus will have been, then main verb third form, then by and the subject. Like example, we will have run an emergency support for disaster. Passive voice will be an emergency support will have been run by us for disaster. So where there is have been or has in the active voice, we use been in the passive voice, and here we use have been. Then it is a future perfect continuous tense. The active voice rule is subject, then will have, then been, then verb ing, then object. And passive voice rule is object, then will have, been, then being, then verb third form, then by plus object, or the subject. The subject. Example, you will have been studying seriously all the subjects for at least 2 years to crack the civil service. Passive voice, all the subjects will have been, then being studied seriously for at least 2 years to crack the civil service exam. And there is also a note to try to avoid using the passive voice for future perfect continuous tense. So here look at that, will have been is directly put in the passive voice, will have been, and as there is verb ing in active, we use the being and the third form of the verb. So here is some practice question for you, but keep in mind the main two things, that is when there is verb with ing in the active voice, you should take obviously the being in the passive voice, and the verb in the passive voice always be in third form. And what has or have or had in the active voice, we used been after has, have or had, and the verb will be in the third form. And where we used has or have or had and the been and the verb with ing, we should use has or have been and then being and the verb third form. So clearly understand the use of been and being. Been, that is BEEN, is used for has or have or had, and the being, that is BEING, is used for verb with ing. So it is quite clear that for ing it will be BEING. Take a practice set of the 10 questions and we will discuss it in the next open session. Thank you for watching. Keep practicing and clearly identified the changes in from active voice to passive voice. There is no tricky part. You have to focus on the sentence construction, and you have to identify the number of the object in the main sentence, that is active sentence, and the person of the subject in the object in the active voice, and according to the number and the person of the object, we use the auxiliary verb or has or have in the passive voice. And this is like the previous classes, that auxiliary verb will follow the subject of this sentence, and in passive voice the auxiliary verb also follow the subject of the passive voice. Again, I remembering some points, that what is the subject in the active voice, it will be the object in the passive voice, and what is the object in the active voice, that will be subject in the passive voice. And don't change the tense of the sentence. That means if the active voice in the present perfect tense, it should be in the present perfect tense in the passive voice. And if you converting it in the passive voice, where there is use of has, have or had, you should use the been in the passive voice after has, have or had. And if there is any continuous tense or verb with ing, you used being, being, before the verb third form, and verb in the past passive voice will be in the third form. These are the just the basic or the common rules. Don't be confused, just take the lessons and try to understand properly. If there is any confusing, please note it and ask me in the open session. Keep practicing and make the answer of the questions. Thank you for watching. It will be there will some rest part of the voices, and it will you will take a lesson or take a class on the next part in class 2. That's all for today. Thank you.